morning. Worship this morning, I believe, was a perfect segue into what we're talking about. So I think that's awesome, and I take it as confirmation because I was a little nervous. I have shared lots of times. I think you guys have seen me up here quite often. And at the movement, I shared a couple messages, but I've never used one of these, so this feels really weird. And I've actually never taught on something like this. I've always just kind of taught from my heart, been able to share from my heart. And that way it's kind of like you can't go wrong. Well, this, I could be going wrong. So bear with me. And I'm practicing with this, so hopefully this works. Being able to track and all that. So I just appreciate your grace in advance, because I know you love me. And I love you guys. So we are going to talk about who we're called to be and where we're called to be it. So there's lots and lots of stories in the Bible about that. But we're going to focus on two things in the beginning, and then a lot of time we're going to spend in Leviticus. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for not groaning. I do appreciate that. So we spent the last month, 6 weeks, Advent on kingdom and how it's upside down. We spent the last half a year on kingdom in general. We're going to continue that theme. And how God's kingdom is different than the world and society. God does this so that we're set apart to show the world that He is different. He has been doing this since forever. He has always been different than every other God. And He wants us to partner with Him. And so this whole book is about Him picking people to partner with. And none of these people are perfect, so this is really good news for us. And so one of the first people that God really calls to be His partner is Abram. And we're going to go ahead and look at that. And I believe His invitation to Abram applies to us as well. So we're going to look at Genesis 12. And what do we get? So, okay, we're not ready for that one yet. Sorry. We're going to back up a little bit into Genesis 12. God calls Abram and says, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So that's a great blessing, and it's awesome for Abram, who then becomes Abraham, but it's also for the world. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Be blessed through Abraham. Will be blessed, I believe, then through us, through all believers who call on Jesus' name. And this calling is not just about blessing in us getting things. It's about bringing the world back together. We're going to restore creation as we partner with God. We're going to bring Eden back, or a new Jerusalem, if you will. God continues that partnership with Moses and the country of Israel, the nation, in Exodus 19. At Mount Sinai, when God is setting up a covenant with His people after bringing them out of 400 years of slavery in Egypt. He calls the people His treasured possession and calls for them to be for Him, for me, for God, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And again, I believe that invitation extends to us today, and that's what we're going to talk about. And that is a huge role, a huge calling. A kingdom of priests and a holy nation. How are we going to do that? Well, first of all, it's impossible. We can't do it on our own. But God, in His infinite grace and mercy, has a plan. And spoiler, the ultimate piece of that plan is still a ways off from where we're at today, but it's still coming. But in the meantime, He's given His people the book of Leviticus. Yes. Yeah. So don't worry, we'll do the flyover, 10,000 feet from above. And we're not going to dig in and look at verse by verse. I'm just going to give you some principles and we're going to divide it into sections and then some roles. And we'll follow along as we go up there. This presentation is not mine. I am a stealer today, but I'm going to give credit to Marty Solomon. But if you listen to him much, he gives all of his teaching credit from Rabbi David Foreman and Ray Vanderleen, I think is his name. And so Vanderlaan, thank you. And so he is always saying this is not new material, it's been gathered. He's a gatherer of material. And so I'm just sharing that material with you. A lot of Google searches also. So go ahead and Google, you'll get the same stuff I did. But if you need real, specific references, I'm happy to help you with that. And so he says Leviticus can be divided into 5 sections. So section 1 is about atonement. It's chapters 1 through 7. And this is being made right with God. Because if we start with the rules, which are coming later, then our lives become about doing instead of about being made right. And we're already made right out of nothing that has to do with us because of the sacrifice. And so it's these sacrifices that allow us right standing and being able to partner with him. And at first this is done in the Old Testament through animal sacrifices, and then later on it's the blood of Jesus that makes us right with God. So it's not anything we do for ourselves. It's standing on that belief and faith now in Jesus that we are made whole by him. So we have that. So we could do, that should be on there. If we go to the next one. Again, yes, and so now we'll go to the second section. Spend a little bit of time here. Section 2 is about the priesthood. It's covered in chapters 8 through 10 and then 21 through 22. It's about Aaron and his sons. There's some really good stories in there, fire and lightning and maybe what not to do, if you want to look at that one. We're not going to go into that now. But it's about their jobs and their roles, and it can be summarized in 4 roles. And these are for us. They have very practical applications for us. And the first thing the first thing a priest does is put God on display. So if we go on, yes, look at that guy. Thank goodness we don't have to walk around like that. But that's how they walked around, so that they were very, very different. There's a visual right away. What's this guy doing? What's his job? And so a lot of it was what they wore, what they ate. As a nation, it was how they treated their families, their wives, their spouses, their children. Jay's done a great lesson for us in the past on there was temples that had religious prostitution, and there were child sacrifices in their culture, and our God does not call that from us. And so he is different. And that was one of the ways, but also then how they looked was different. So how they lived and how they looked and what they did was what set them apart. We have Jesus in the New Testament. We can go to Matthew 5, which continues this, how can we look different? It's a little bit more practical, and it's the things that we've been talking about through Advent, about loving your enemy, not murdering, or not even getting even, not even thinking about it. And that chapter ends with, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Perfect here is holy. I think it's kadosh. No one corrected me, so I think we're okay there. My Hebrew is no good. But he says it a lot, so I kind of got that one. So it's to be different, holy, set apart, because our God is different. So it's not calling us to live this perfect life where we follow all the rules and we dot every I and cross every T. And God is very, very different than the Egyptian gods, than Baal and Moloch and the Roman gods in Jesus' time, and our gods as well. We don't serve them as they have a shrine that we go to, but we have greed and we have lust and we have all the things that we put before God. So there's no other God in history that is for their people, that makes a way for the people to be right with God. All these other cultures, these people are very worried about, are the gods for them? And what do they have to do to get in good standing with them? Our God makes it very clear that he wants us to be right with him and partner with him. Which leads us to the second thing that priests do. And that's they help people navigate their atonement. Awesome. And so here we have a sacrificial system that's really, really confusing for the average Joe. When do I bring a goat? When do I bring a lamb? Or when do I bring a bull? And when do we do it this way? And when do we do it that way? And so the priest's job is to help the people navigate the system. And so one of the things I found interesting was if you wrong someone, the atonement process may include a fellowship meal with the person you wronged. So how fun is that? Oh, I made Libby mad, and so now I got to bring her to church with me, and we got to sit together next to and have this meal and look each other right in the eye. And how are we going to do this? And Libby's really mad at me, and I'm really sorry, but it's still not right. Oh, thankful our priest can come and help us navigate that. He shows us how to do that together, how to walk that out. Today, we help people navigate their relationship with Jesus. What does it look like for a new believer to find out who Jesus is? What does it take to for them to walk that out? Thirdly, the priest intercedes on behalf of others. So we have a God, we have a priest, and we have Israel. So if there's a message, there's a really clear picture of that in Moses, right? He's always giving God, the people, the message from God. He's also, then telling God not to burn them up, right? Don't kill them. We'll try, we'll do better. And honestly, it's because you said, we want to show our neighboring nations who you are, for him to not destroy the people. So then also it gets extended to that, and we have God, Israel. Now the nation becomes that priest because they're showing the world who God is. So we should have a couple of those if you go to the next. Yep, so we have God, priest, Israel, and then the next one is God, Israel, world, and we're that priest. And so that's us for now, like we are Israel. And we stand in that gap, and we are called to fight for everyone's place in the family, not explain why they aren't allowed. So when unbelievers look at us, they should see a God of love and grace and peace and acceptance. Marty even goes on to say we should find every loophole possible to get people into the kingdom. That he imagines standing at the gate and having to, there's like kind of two scenarios. God saying, you should have been more inclusive. You should have been more loving. You should have shown more grace. Why didn't you include them? It's one option. Or God going, man, I don't know how you got that guy in, but I guess, if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me. That hit me. We should be that gracious. That's the scandal of the cross, right? That it is for everyone. How can we get them into the kingdom? Don't freak out on me if you're worried about some things. We're going to get to it. But that's our job as a priest. It's to get them in. We don't judge them. We don't decide whether they are or aren't. We love them like they are. Fourth, the priest distributes resources to those in need. There's always enough if you get it where it needs to go. And Leviticus never asks why the people in need are in need. I think James talked about that when we were doing Year of Jubilee in our Advent. We're just called to share our extra. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in the future. So section 3, how to live as a priest. These are chapters 11 through 15, and they are the holiness code. So now we got some rules. But it's not because of the rules. It's not just to have these rules and do everything they say. It's about being different. I say this over and over again. Personal holiness is built on disciplined conviction of truth. I do listen to this a lot of times in the podcast, so I'm going to say it a couple times for you guys too. Personal holiness is built on disciplined conviction of truth. So while I judge myself, how I behave, what is right and wrong for me is personal and goes up and down, me and God. We can include others, right? We have our priests, our friends, we have accountability, we have counseling, we have all of that. But when it comes down to it, it's up and down with me and God. And that is versus community holiness, which is built on incredible grace. And this is that part of getting everyone in. Belonging is so important. We have to give people a place to belong. And there's a lot of tension between these two. What's right for me and extending grace to everyone else. A lot of tension. And we have to hold those two things together and work that out. We have to wrestle with it. And so how do we hold ourselves accountable and make a way for everyone else? And it's just working that out. And we can do this because God does it for us. Once one of us is perfect, then we can start, pointing fingers. But none of us are. And so I like how he said, represent your God before you represent your opinion. So just to be clear, I am not talking about throwing this out or these rules don't apply. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your opinion. Represent your God. Be loving, kind, gracious, merciful before you represent your opinion. Don't compromise your conviction, but always represent God. That's where that tension comes in. We're holding two things that are very difficult to hold and act on at the same time. But it's really important when we hear stories like we did last week from Earl. He is bringing in people that have never heard the gospel before. They're addicted to drugs. They're living a lifestyle probably none of us would agree with, but they need brought in. How are we going to bring them in if they're only feeling judgment and condemnation? It's not going to work. And that is not the face of love that Jesus has. It's going to be really important for us as we walk out and step more and more into faith in creating this discipleship culture that we're talking about, this breakthrough that we've been wanting as a church and that we want in our personal life. We must love others like Jesus did. So again, truth in my life, grace in community. Our holiness is only determinable by how we relate to them. So they only know if we're good if we help them feel good. Now again, this is not about compromise. We are not compromising. But they need to feel love from us. They don't know our rules and our code. And so if we just make them feel bad because they're not following it, what good did that do? So no judgment and no condemnation from the priests. The center of Leviticus, little side note, is the Day of Atonement, which is pretty awesome. And hopefully we'll get to focus more on that at another time because it's a sermon of its own. But once a year, one goat for all the sins of Israel. That's pretty awesome. Section 4, how to celebrate. This goes back to Sabbath, which we've also been talking a lot about the last few weeks. It's to rest and remember and celebrate what God has done. I think he might say how to party. Woo-hoo. Our God was one that celebrated the good things. He wanted you to remember what he's done in your life. Section 5, caring for the oppressed. God instructs us to be justice-driven, to take care of orphans, widows, and foreigners. We'll talk again more about this. We're going to dive into Year of Jubilee. We talked about Year of Jubilee. But for now, just know it's part of the guidebook. So what does this mean for us today? Lots of things. There's lots and lots and lots of ways for us to look different in the world we live in. Simply from, like the Jewish people, they didn't eat pork. They wore funny clothes. Their hair was different. We can do that. We can make people ask. Marty Solomon wears the 4 tassels on his belt. Wears English clothing with tassels. He said, do you want to believe the conversations I have in the line at the grocery store? No doubt. It could be dressing modestly. It could be not drinking alcohol when you're out with your friends. It could be, not partaking in this or doing that. Like, just all kinds of things. But when we start to look different, people notice. And how I look different and walk this out might be different than how you walk it out. Who and where God calls me greatly impacts how this looks. So for many years, I worked at a place called Ed Supplies. It was ag retail, so we sold supplies to farmers. and I worked with truck drivers. I think I've told you guys that before. Truck drivers are an interesting group. Do we have any truck drivers before I dive into my example here? I loved them. They were awesome. But to look different there, I just had to not cuss. I had to smile. I was in charge of answering the phone. It's like, hey, that's Blythe. How can I help you today? Most annoying person calls, and they see me, and I'm smiling, and I'm like, yep. Oh yeah, you forgot to call? Oh yeah, and now you need it today? Now you need it now? I'll see what I can do. You know, of course I'm angry. Of course I'm annoyed. Of course, why can't you plan ahead? And now I have to figure this out and get my truck drivers, in the right place at the right time. But they saw that, and they started asking questions. Like, man, you don't get, that guy doesn't annoy you? Oh, he annoys me. Yeah, no worries. And I worked full-time, then the boys were born, and then I went seasonal. So I wouldn't work for several months, and then I'd work half the year, basically. And so you got to see me every day. I would know after the first year, the first 2 weeks I'm there, I am hearing everyone's problems. Because they know I'm different. They know I'm gonna listen. They made fun of me a little bit too, like, oh, Mama's back. Oh, clean up the office, put your stuff away. Yeah, yep, Mom's back, here we go. But I heard all of their struggles, all of their pain. And after a while, I was like, can I pray for you? As I got empowered to walk my faith out even more. There's 3 guys that, anyway, full story. 3 guys came and said, they had marriage problems, and by the end it was like, they stayed together. Now 10 years later, they actually did end up getting divorced, but that's okay. But the last one, he came to me and he was like, I need to talk to you. And I was like, all right. And so we're out standing out back, and he says, my wife's packing her stuff today, and she's leaving. And yeah, same reaction, right? All these years later, and I was like, what are you gonna do about it? And he's like, I can't do anything. And I said, that is not true. And I said, are you sorry? And he said, of course I'm sorry. I go, do you want to make it right? And he said, of course I want to make it right. I said, tell her. And we actually, how would you say this to her? And I prayed for him, and he came back the next day, and he goes, she didn't leave. Another time, a guy said, I had just gotten back, like I said, just started back up every day, and he shuts the door of his office, and he's like, you won't believe what happened. And I'm like, okay. My son says he's gay. My wife got the church involved. This is a disaster. I'm gonna lose my son. I might lose my wife, because now we're fighting about it. My kids are a wreck. They had 4 kids. I said, do you love your son? He said, yes. Do you want him to leave? No. Tell him. When you work with the people we work with, that is dangerous information to get out. And so I looked at him, I said, and tell everybody at work. It's not a secret, and you have nothing to hide. You love your son. It was not as easygoing and wonderful as the guy whose wife he didn't leave, but Logan lives in New York now and lives a very different life. But he comes home every Christmas, every 4th of July. He's welcome. He brings his friend. He has a place to stay in their home. They're a family. And it was not difficult to give that advice to them, but I built a relationship with them. They knew they could tell me those things, and I would not judge them, and they knew I would have sound advice. And God gave me that favor. That was 100% Him. I have my training and my background, which helped, but my role there and the favor and the relationships I built, that was all God. And so each one of us is called to a place. It might be where we work, it might be our family, it might be the clerk at the grocery store, or the gal that gets your coffee every morning. Would you, as simple as smiling and saying thank you and making eye contact, those things set you apart. Do them with intentionality. So these things are all upside down, and these things can change the world. And we must function well in these roles. It's crucial that we understand that that's what we're doing when we do it, personally and as a church. And if we believe revival is coming, that harvest, then we must know how God expects us to act so we can represent him well. So when we have people that look different than us walk through our doors, how are we going to treat them? How are we going to act? It has to be with love and grace. And understanding these things can be the beginning of that breakthrough that we want. We're going to look at a lesson from Dan. So if we go to our first map, okay, so this is kind of what happens if we possibly don't do this well. So we have Dan, if you look kind of in the middle on the left, the little red L-shaped space there. This is at the conquest, so when they're heading into the promised land, this was the area they were given. And if we look at Joshua 19, we have this, like where they get their allotment. And they were the 7th tribe to get their allotment. And it says the towns that they get to go to. And then there's this little parentheses. When the territory of the Danites was lost to them, they went up and attacked Leshem, took it, and put it to the sword and occupied it. They settled in Leshem and renamed it Dan. So if you go to the Message, which I always enjoy, you guys know that, it says, oh, I gotta find it, it starts me over. But the people of Dan failed to get rid of the Westerners. They failed at their job they were supposed to do. And they were the ones pushed back, and they were the ones kept out of the plain, and they didn't have enough room. And so the people of Dan marched up to a different area. Now if we go to the second map, now we're way up north there, a little red spot on the top of the blue. They're living in a new spot, and they settle it. And what do you suppose happens to them there? I'm curious, does anyone know? Because I didn't know this. This was new to me.
Do they get wiped out?
They get wiped out. They're not doing what they're supposed to do, where they're supposed to do it, and when you get to Revelation, they're gone. And this is where they become one of Ahab and Jezebel's royal cities. Idolatry becomes rampant. They just completely fail as a nation and as a people. I just had this thought as I was putting this together. This thought's mine. I look at a lot of churches closing their doors right now. Are they doing their job in the spot God gave them? I'm sure that's not the case everywhere, but it is some of the places I believe. We have to step into our role as being priests. We have to represent God well. I think we're gonna continue this theme in different ways. We are gonna talk about Year of Jubilee and how we can walk that out as a community together and personally. We're gonna keep talking about kingdom and what it means. I'm gonna close with this. 1 Peter 1:13 through 16. Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. And that's that calling that we have that is throughout the Word. To represent Him well, to be different, to look different, to act different, and to show the world who God is. So Lord, we do just thank you that that has been your mission from day one, is to partner with us and to show the world who you are. That you love the world so much you died for us. I have said, I think many times, I sometimes question your plan, but we know it's good. We know that, just like the song Jeremy played for us and sang for us today, the road is narrow, but the mercy is wide. So Lord, show us, and let us say yes, and let us be obedient.